Winfield Acres was a suburban enclave known for its winding roads and manicured lawns. At first glance, the homes exuded a calm uniformity, front hedges trimmed to the same height, pastel paint jobs carefully selected from an HOA-approved palette, and mailboxes all matching a singular design. Few realized how closely the Homeowners Association, HOA, monitored the details of daily life. Everything from yard decorations to trash pickup schedules was subject to oversight. Though the regulations seemed petty to many, most residents played along, resigned to the notion that the rules protected property values. But one woman, Brenda Lee Anderson, nicknamed Karen by her exasperated neighbors, had made it her personal mission to enforce the HOA's guidelines with near-fanatical devotion. Her ruthless approach would soon ignite a neighborhood scandal, all centering on something as mundane as trash bags. Karen was in her late 40s, slender, always dressed in pressed slacks or a crisp blouse, hair in a practical bob that never looked ruffled. She kept a watchful eye on the entire neighborhood. Each day, she took a brisk inspection walk, clipboard in hand, jotting down the slightest deviation from the HOA covenants. Perhaps a wind chime sounding too loudly, or a lawn gnome not on the approved decor list. Karen prided herself on upholding standards. She believed the slightest slip, overflowing trash, or a fence too tall would erode the neighborhood's classy veneer. She had no sense of boundaries, once scolding a neighbor for letting a toddler's squeaky toy remain on the driveway overnight. Yet few dared confront her, for she wore the HOA's authority like armor, threatening fines or committee hearings. In her mind, she was the hero, saving Winfield Acres from chaos. In a humble single-story house near the neighborhood's east gate lived Roland Miller, a 75-year-old widower. He was quiet and unassuming, having moved here a decade ago with his late wife. Now alone, he coped as best he could with daily chores. One challenge was managing his trash. Since Roland cooked at home and occasionally helped neighbors discard old newspapers or yard clippings, his garbage volume was sometimes higher than average. He didn't drive much anymore, so he tried to limit trips out, meaning trash sometimes built up, then got dragged to the curb in multiple hefty bags on collection day. A small detail, but enough to catch Karen's vigilant gaze. Karen had long noticed Roland's trash output, especially on Tuesday mornings when he placed multiple bags curbside. She considered it excessive. Even though the HOA rules permitted a certain number of bags, she disliked how the bin lids sometimes couldn't close perfectly when his refuse was stuffed inside. She worried about spillage or animals rummaging. She initiated a formal complaint to the HOA board. One resident, Roland Miller, consistently exceeds the recommended trash volume. Bags occasionally overfill or fail to remain fully contained in the standard bin. This unsightly approach threatens our neighborhood's cleanliness. The board politely acknowledged her note, but found no real violation. Roland's trash was still collected properly, and no rule strictly forbade multiple bags. Irritated, Karen began targeting Roland more directly, leaving friendly reminder notes on his mailbox about appropriate bin usage and the need to avoid overstuffing. Roland tried to comply, but had limited physical ability to break down trash more meticulously. He worried about Karen's constant scrutiny, yet lacked the energy or funds to pay for extra pickups. A quiet tension was brewing. One breezy Tuesday morning, the neighborhood's trash trucks rumbled through, collecting bins and bags. Roland had set out 2 bins plus 3 extra bags. The collectors took everything, though the lids were slightly ajar. Karen observed from her driveway across the street, clicking her tongue in disapproval. As soon as the truck left, Karen marched over to Roland's curb, scowling at how the bins had been left half-tilted. A few stray scraps from the bin top had tumbled onto the grass, presumably dislodged by the truck's mechanical arm. Karen fumed that unsightly litter marred the pristine look of Winfield Acres. She hastily gathered the scraps, then scribbled yet another note, wedging it in Roland's mailbox. Your trash disposal is unacceptable. Secure your bags properly or face an HOA hearing. Roland found the note later, sighing in resignation. He had no ill will, but handling trash alone at his age was already a chore. He tried to do better next time, tightly tying bags and pushing them fully into the bin. But Karen remained unconvinced. She saw him as a rule breaker, a threat to the neighborhood's polished image. Over the following weeks, Karen escalated her campaign. She took photos whenever she felt Roland's trash overflowed. She cornered him in his driveway, spouting criticisms about too many bags, advising him to pay for an extra bin or reduce his waste. Roland, quietly polite, listened but felt overwhelmed. He occasionally asked a neighbor, Linda, to help break down boxes or compress trash to keep it within a bin. Still, some weeks, the volume remained large. The HOA board, inundated by Karen's messages, responded that while they encouraged neatness, Roland had not broken an explicit rule. If the trash company accepted his bags, there was no direct violation. Karen seethed at their inaction, convinced the HOA was shirking its duty. She contemplated taking matters into her own hands. Her frustration boiled. If the board wouldn't punish Roland, she might demonstrate his messiness publicly. Roland wasn't friendless. A few neighbors who admired his gentle nature rallied around him. Linda, who lived 2 doors down, often swung by to help compress his recyclables. Another neighbor, George, offered to let Roland store an extra bin by his fence if needed. Yet Roland, wary of imposing, tried to manage on his own. He disliked the conflict with Karen, but felt powerless to stop her harassment. Word spread about Karen's new target. Some residents rolled their eyes, recalling her past micromanagement. A couple confronted her, telling her to let an elderly man manage his life in peace. She snapped back that she was only protecting the neighborhood from unsightly trash overflow. Tension simmered. People feared Karen might do something drastic, though few imagined she'd sink to literal trash sabotage. As the next trash day approached, Karen hatched an idea. If the HOA wouldn't intervene, she'd publicly shame Roland by displaying his garbage. She reasoned that if neighbors saw how excessive his output was, they'd side with her in demanding the board impose stricter rules. She planned to tie any extra bags that didn't fit fully inside the bin to a tree, making it a spectacle for all to see. The notion was borderline absurd. Who physically ties trash bags to a tree? Yet Karen believed it a justified measure. She convinced herself that humiliating Roland would prompt him to produce less trash or buy extra service. She stealthily gathered rope and waited for an opportunity. On Monday night, Roland placed his usual 2 bins and 3 extra bags at the curb. He tried to compress the bags, but there was still a fair volume. He'd cleaned out his fridge that week, discarding old leftovers and containers. Sighing, he returned indoors, never suspecting the drama about to unfold. Karen, peering from her window, saw the 3 additional bags. She felt a surge of triumphant anger, more proof of Roland's incorrigible ways. She grabbed rope from her garage, donned black gardening gloves, and snuck across the street under the dim glow of a street lamp. Quietly, she cut open one of Roland's trash bags, rummaging inside to confirm its contents: old takeout containers, coffee grounds, used tissues. Disgusted but resolute, she tied the top of each bag with rope, then hoisted them onto a low tree branch near the sidewalk. One by one, she hung them like bizarre ornaments, letting them dangle just a few feet above the ground. The stench wafted in the night air. Satisfied, Karen left a scrawled note pinned to the trunk. "Stop overstuffing the bins, Karen." Then she hurried home, adrenaline pumping. She believed her dramatic display would spark an outcry, forcing Roland to behave. Little did she realize the backlash she'd face for humiliating a senior citizen. Early Tuesday morning, Roland stepped outside to wheel his bins closer to the curb before the truck arrived. To his astonishment, he saw his 3 extra trash bags hanging from the tree, swaying in the morning breeze. A pungent smell hit his nostrils. He stood dumbfounded, noticing the scrap of paper pinned to the trunk with Karen's name. Heart pounding, he felt humiliation and anger welling up. A passing jogger slowed, similarly aghast at the sight. "Mr. Miller, what happened?" the jogger asked, voice thick with disbelief. Roland stammered, I don't know. Someone must have done this in the night. Furious tears threatened to gather. He retrieved a small step ladder from his garage, carefully climbed it, and began cutting the rope that bound each bag. Garbage spilled slightly as he lowered them. The fiasco was humiliating beyond measure. Within minutes, neighbors driving by saw Roland wrestling with his own trash in the tree. Word spread like wildfire. Anger spiked among those who recognized Karen's typical interference. Linda rushed over to help Roland salvage the bags and resecure them for collection. She consoled the distressed man, promising to stand by him. Meanwhile, the rumor that Karen had forcibly hung Roland's garbage soared across Winfield Acres. By midday, the entire neighborhood buzzed with talk of the trash tree fiasco. Emails, text messages, and social media posts flew. Some residents even snapped pictures of Roland cutting down the bags, posting them with outrage captions. "This is cruelty," wrote one. "Who humiliates an elderly neighbor over trash?" demanded another. Karen sensed the uproar. She typed a hasty message to the HOA board, claiming credit. "I took action last night, demonstrating Mr. Miller's continued abuse of trash guidelines. This was a necessary step to highlight the problem. I trust the board will now see the seriousness." She expected admiration for her boldness. Instead, the board members reeled in horror at her confession, alarmed that she'd physically tampered with someone else's property in such a public, humiliating way. Residents began emailing the board, demanding immediate condemnation of Karen's act. Some threatened to hold a protest or boycott any event she organized. The kind, rule-abiding facade of Winfield Acres cracked, revealing deep anger at such an outrageous violation. Roland spent the day in a state of embarrassed shock. He'd never faced such a personal attack. Though he was gentle by nature, this incident stirred a quiet fury. The shame of seeing his household refused dangling in full view, the strain of cutting them down while neighbors watched. It overwhelmed him. He considered lodging a formal complaint or even calling the police. Linda and George encouraged him, stating that Karen's stunt was borderline harassment. He typed a brief letter to the HOA, detailing what happened and how it left him feeling harassed and humiliated. Roland also considered contacting local authorities. Damaging or tampering with someone else's property could be seen as vandalism or harassment. The entire fiasco eroded his sense of safety in his own neighborhood. The HOA board, led by President Edgar Tompkins, scrambled to contain the fallout. They quickly realized that Karen had essentially admitted to the act in her email, providing them with a paper trail of her wrongdoing. The board convened an emergency session to decide how to respond. Several members spoke out passionately, calling her stunt bullying and indefensible. Though Karen was on the Civic Standards Committee, her extremist approach had always raised eyebrows. Now, she crossed the line. The board had to decide on immediate measures. Some argued for her removal from all HOA positions. Others suggested fines or suspension of membership privileges. Meanwhile, they also recognized Roland's position. He deserved support, not condemnation. Ultimately, the board issued a strongly worded statement. The HOA condemns in the strongest terms the recent public humiliation of Mr. Roland Miller's trash. Such an act violates our values of respect and neighborliness. We are investigating disciplinary measures against the individual responsible. We encourage residents to show courtesy in managing any concerns about trash volumes, rather than resorting to vigilantism. Karen, reading the statement, felt a jolt of indignation. She believed the board was overreacting. She clung to the notion that she'd done the right thing for the community's image. Neighbors rallied around Roland. Some brought homemade meals, offering to help break down or recycle items to reduce his trash volume. Others offered to store extra bags in their own bins if they had room. Linda organized a small group to handle Roland's waste disposal each week, so he wouldn't be alone or overwhelmed. A few neighbors suggested starting a GoFundMe or collecting funds to buy Roland a personal, larger-capacity garbage bin. While the standard HOA bins were uniform in size, an extra container could help him avoid overstuffing. The community realized that collectively, they could solve the minor trash issue easily. The real problem was Karen's bullying. Residents wanted to ensure no one else faced such humiliation again. Karen, noticing the communal sympathy for Roland, refused to apologize. She posted a lengthy rant on the neighborhood's private social media page, calling Roland's trash disgusting, accusing the HOA board of coddling rule breakers. She insisted that someone had to do something and that her method, while dramatic, was necessary to raise awareness. This post backfired spectacularly. Residents responded with outrage, condemning her cruelty toward an elderly man. The thread devolved into heated comments, with people demanding she resign from the committee. Karen, doubling down, threatened to reveal all sorts of violations she'd recorded about others. This only fueled more anger. The online forum's moderator eventually removed Karen's post for violating community guidelines, leaving her even more isolated. Meanwhile, Roland received an outpouring of kindness from neighbors he barely knew. A sense of neighborly solidarity blossomed. They recognized that if Karen could do this to him, she could target anyone. The entire fiasco ironically brought the neighborhood together. Some joked that Karen's sabotage had turned more people into friends than any official HOA mixer ever had. Linda and George began organizing a small fundraiser to buy a specialized trash can for Roland, one with sidelit access, easier for him to deposit bags without lifting them overhead. They also arranged with the local disposal company to provide him a second official bin, if needed, with neighbors splitting the monthly fee so Roland wouldn't bear the cost alone. Amid this wave of positivity, Roland felt a glimmer of relief. Perhaps something good could emerge from his public humiliation. He only hoped the HOA would follow through on disciplining Karen, preventing her from further escalation. 2 weeks after the tree-hanging incident, the HOA board summoned Karen to a disciplinary hearing. They cited her violation of neighborly conduct, tampering with private property, and causing emotional distress. The meeting took place in the community's small clubhouse, behind closed doors. Karen arrived with her usual clipboard, ready to defend herself. Meanwhile, a dozen residents, including Roland, waited outside, anticipating the outcome. Inside, the board grilled Karen on her motivations. She repeated that Roland's trash volumes threatened the neighborhood's tidiness, that the board had ignored her complaints, and she felt compelled to act. She refused to see the act as malicious, describing it instead as a dramatic demonstration. The board members, appalled, pointed out that physically relocating someone else's trash to a humiliating display was inexcusable. After deliberation, the board informed Karen they'd vote on punitive measures, likely removing her from all official committees, imposing a formal censure, and possibly restricting her from filing new complaints for a set period unless validated by multiple neighbors. Karen stormed out, refusing to accept any wrongdoing. The final vote would take place the following week. Roland, Linda, and George decided to attend the next open HOA meeting where the board's final decision on Karen's censure would be announced. Several other neighbors also planned to speak, urging the board to act decisively. In the days leading up to it, they circulated a petition asking for a formal apology from Karen and a clear statement condemning her behavior. The petition racked up signatures quickly. Even some who previously found Karen's enforcement beneficial realized her vigilantism had crossed a moral line. The petition reached over 100 signatures, significant for a single neighborhood. Karen, hearing about it, dismissed the petition as mob rule, though it clearly rattled her. Linda also pitched the idea of the HOA clarifying trash regulations to prevent future conflicts. She proposed a new trash overflow policy, ensuring if a resident needed more capacity, the HOA or neighbors could help coordinate solutions rather than shaming them. Karen didn't quietly await the board's verdict. She continued bombarding the HOA with claims about others not following the exact bag limit. She insisted a handful of residents also used multiple bins. The board, however, saw through her frantic attempts to shift blame. They recognized that no one else had stooped to physically tampering with another resident's trash. Karen's longtime sense of power eroded daily. She felt cornered, yet her pride wouldn't let her apologize or step away. Some suspected she might sell her house and flee. Others predicted she'd fight to the bitter end. Meanwhile, the neighborhood braced for the next official meeting, certain it would be a turning point for Winfield Acres culture. Would empathy and community triumph over Karen's brand of hostility? At last, the HOA's monthly open meeting arrived. Neighbors packed the clubhouse. Roland, wearing a neat jacket, sat up front with Linda and George. Karen lingered on one side, face taut. The board addressed routine business first: landscaping budgets, upcoming community events. Finally, they reached the main item: disciplinary action concerning Ms. Brenda Lee Anderson's conduct. President Edgar Tompkins read a prepared statement. After investigating the incident where Mr. Roland Miller's trash bags were tied to a public tree, we find that Ms. Anderson acted in violation of HOA guidelines on neighborly conduct, property tampering, and harassment. The board has voted on the following measures. The hush was palpable. Karen stared stonily as Edgar enumerated the consequences: immediate removal from all HOA committees, a formal censure letter placed in her resident file, and a 6-month ban from lodging new complaints unless co-signed by another homeowner. She was also urged to issue a written apology to Roland. The board ended with, "We stand for a respectful community. This behavior has no place in Winfield Acres." When the announcement ended, many in the audience erupted in applause. Roland and Linda exchanged relieved smiles. Karen stood abruptly, declared the board's decision unfair and ungrateful, then stormed out. On her way, she muttered about appealing the censure or seeking legal counsel. Some neighbors scowled at her retreating form. Others felt pity, seeing how she dug her own grave with prideful obstinacy. Edgar then invited Linda to share an update. The neighborhood had collected funds to get Roland a specialized trash can with a side lid, plus an arrangement with the disposal company for extra capacity. Cheers greeted this announcement. The board also hinted they'd finalize a clear, maximum bag rule to avoid future confusion, but it would be accompanied by an official program to help residents struggling with large volumes. Everyone saw how easy it was to solve the issue with compassion, not humiliation. The next day, Linda and George delivered the brand-new trash can to Roland's home. It was sturdier than the standard bin, with a side hatch making it easier for him to deposit bags without lifting them. The color matched the HOA's standard gray, ensuring compliance. They also presented him with a modest check from the leftover funds, which Roland shyly accepted. He was deeply touched, scarcely believing so many neighbors cared enough to chip in. He practiced opening and closing the side lid, noticing how it locked firmly to prevent spillage. This would drastically reduce any chance of overstuffing or wildlife getting into his garbage. A wave of gratitude overwhelmed him. "All this kindness. I can't thank you enough," he murmured, voice trembling. Linda patted his arm, replying, "We stand by you, Roland." No more nonsense from Karen. Within a week, the HOA board updated the official guidelines. Each residence could use up to 2 standard bins plus an additional personal bin if needed, provided it matched the approved color. If anyone regularly had overflow, the board recommended signing up for an extra pickup or seeking neighbors help to recycle or dispose of large items. The new policy also introduced a trash buddy system, volunteers to assist seniors or disabled residents in managing their trash, ensuring no one faced issues like Roland's alone. Moreover, the policy explicitly banned tampering with another resident's garbage, labeling it an actionable offense with severe consequences. This was a direct response to Karen's antics. The changes received widespread applause. A local paper even ran a short story on how one bully's tactics led to a community's better solutions. As the new policy took effect, Karen found herself more isolated. She could no longer show up at board meetings as a committee member, nor bombard the board with unilateral complaints. If she saw a perceived violation, she needed a second resident's signature. Few neighbors would side with her now. Some politely refused to speak with her, others glared openly. She stewed in resentment, convinced the HOA had lost its standards by coddling rule breakers. She typed vitriolic social media posts, many of which the moderators removed. She considered moving away, but her home's mortgage and the current market prices made that complicated. So she remained, trapped in a neighborhood that now rejected her methods. Meanwhile, Roland adjusted to his improved trash setup. No more stuffed bags, precariously balanced. The side lid been made daily disposal simpler. On collection days, he'd calmly wheel it to the curb, where the truck's automated arm lifted it neatly. Gone were the days of multiple disheveled bags. A small but profound relief for the elderly man. Neighbors sometimes helped him move the bin back, where they'd stop to chat, ensuring he felt less lonely. Linda brought groceries on occasion, noticing how Roland brightened with a bit of company. Freed from the stress of Karen's scrutiny, Roland began smiling more. The memory of the humiliating trash tree incident lingered, but it no longer held him in dread. The entire neighborhood recognized he had emerged stronger, buoyed by communal empathy. Karen's downfall triggered a subtle but important shift at Winfield Acres. The stifling sense that one must obey or else face Karen's wrath dissipated. People began expressing themselves more freely, placing small garden ornaments, painting front doors slightly bolder colors, still within broad guidelines, but not the bland uniformity Karen had enforced. The board maintained moderate rules, but enforced them kindly. Even social events changed. Previously, Karen had overshadowed them with her constant reminders of acceptable decor. Now, gatherings felt more relaxed. Families hosted block parties with fewer anxious glances over their shoulders. Kids chalked the sidewalks with hopscotch squares, unafraid of petty citations. The community blossomed with a friendlier, less oppressive atmosphere. Encouraged by neighbors, Roland attended a few HOA meetings as a regular attendee, quietly observing. He even spoke up once about the new trash policy, praising the trash buddy concept. People clapped warmly, remembering how the fiasco began. Linda teased that he'd become an honorary hero for spurring these positive changes. Roland humbly shook his head, insisting he never wanted conflict, but he appreciated the outcome. He also started volunteering with a local seniors group, helping deliver groceries to others who might struggle. The group found Roland's perspective valuable. He understood the pride of wanting independence, yet also the importance of neighborly help. Karen scowled whenever she spotted him stepping into the clubhouse, clearly resentful that the man she tried to humiliate was now well-respected. But she had no official capacity to confront him. Instead, she'd pass by with a forced smile or a glare, receiving only polite nods in return. Late one evening, Karen found herself pacing her living room, replaying the board's censure in her head. She felt the impulse to do something, anything, to reclaim her sense of control. For a fleeting moment, she considered a new scheme, maybe sabotage the new bin Roland had, or tip it over on trash day. But her rational side warned that any further assault on Roland's property would likely lead to legal action. She realized the entire community was watching her for any sign of wrongdoing. She resented this softening of the rules. She muttered to herself that if only the HOA had listened to her from the start, she wouldn't have had to hang those trash bags. But deep down, perhaps, she knew she'd gone too far. Pride, however, wouldn't let her admit it. Despite Karen's bitterness, Roland's new trash can with a side lid became a minor symbol of progress. A few other older residents who struggled with standard bins inquired about purchasing similar models. The HOA board recognized a broader need, so they approved an alternative container design for seniors or those with disabilities, relaxing the once rigid uniform bin requirement. This expansion improved accessibility for many, something that wouldn't have happened without the impetus of Karen's shocking act. Neighbors often joked that Karen inadvertently triggered an era of garbage reforms. They even teased about naming the new policy after her, though obviously that never became official. The tension around trash disposal turned into a community success story. Improved convenience, less spillage, more neighborly help. Local gossip sites and a small county newspaper caught wind of the bizarre tale. A short article appeared. HOA committee member hangs trash bags on senior's tree, sparks outrage. While it didn't name Karen explicitly, it described the fiasco in broad strokes, praising the neighborhood's unified response. Another piece highlighted how seniors deserve thoughtful approaches to everyday tasks like trash disposal. Though not front-page news, these stories circulated among residents. Some cringed that their quiet suburb was now infamous for an outlandish trash-based dispute. Others found relief that the coverage emphasized positive changes. Regardless, Karen fumed at any mention that cast her as the villain. She refused interview requests, ignoring reporters who emailed for comment. One morning, Roland happened to see Karen while picking up his mail. She was walking briskly, eyes on her phone. For a moment, their gazes locked. Roland's heart twinged with memories of that humiliating morning, but he mustered a polite nod. Karen paused, face flushing. She seemed about to speak, then changed her mind, continuing on without a word. Roland sighed, feeling a mix of pity and residual anger. He had no interest in further conflict, only wanting peace. This fleeting exchange underscored the gulf between them. A single misguided stunt had destroyed any neighborly rapport they might have had. Roland hoped that over time, Karen might come to regret her actions and perhaps make amends, though he wouldn't hold his breath. Spring arrived at Winfield Acres, painting the yards with fresh blossoms. The neighborhood looked radiant. Freed from Karen's oppressive oversight, residents planted vibrant flowers, installed modest ornaments, or tried new landscaping ideas. The board still enforced fundamental rules, but with a kinder, more flexible approach. Meanwhile, the fiasco with Roland's trash receded into memory, overshadowed by a renewed sense of community spirit. Roland spent more time gardening, aided by Linda's occasional visits. They discussed vegetables or herbs he might grow. The new trash system functioned seamlessly. He rarely needed to put out extra bags. Karen's old argument about too many bags was moot. Life felt simpler, calmer. Behind the scenes, Karen wrestled with a sense of displacement. She once thrived on policing the neighborhood, but after losing her committee seat, she lacked a channel for her fastidious impulses. She tried to redirect them into personal projects, repainting her spare room, reorganizing her closet, but a void remained. She'd built her identity around being the guardian of Winfield Acres, and now that role was gone. Occasionally, she'd peer out the window at Roland's new bin, scowling. A part of her wanted to sabotage it. Another part recognized she'd face immediate repercussions. This tension simmered, unresolved. She had no friends left to vent to, no official support. Pride prevented her from seeking therapy or truly apologizing to Roland. And so, she drifted in bitter solitude. Weeks later, the HOA board announced an opening on a brand new subcommittee devoted to community outreach, aiming to foster more neighborly bonds. Linda saw the announcement and teased that Roland might be an ideal fit, given how he'd inadvertently brought neighbors together. Roland laughed off the idea. He was too shy, preferring a quieter life. But others encouraged him, pointing out that the new subcommittee was quite different from Karen's style of enforcement. In a quiet turn of events, Roland applied and was accepted to join. The subcommittee's mission included planning seasonal get-togethers, organizing volunteer teams for yard help or trash buddy support, and bridging generational gaps. The older man's calm demeanor and personal experiences made him a thoughtful addition. He soon found himself brainstorming friendly events to strengthen community ties. Karen, of course, was apoplectic at the thought that Roland, a man she saw as a trash offender, would hold any HOA position. She ran into a neighbor who promptly told her to mind her own business. Karen retreated, outraged at how the tables had turned. One afternoon, Linda approached Roland with an idea. What if the subcommittee organizes a neighborhood cleanup day with the local waste company? We could get a big dumpster for old furniture or bulky items, so no one's forced to hide them or overstuff bins. Roland liked the notion, seeing it as a constructive approach to potential overflow problems. The subcommittee embraced the plan, scheduling it for early summer. Residents would be encouraged to haul out large items, old couches, broken chairs, leftover yard debris, for a single day of free disposal. Volunteers, including a few strong teenagers, would assist seniors or anyone who needed help. The waste company agreed to provide the dumpster. This event would reduce junk accumulation, another step in ensuring no one ended up with extra trash fiascos again. The board wholeheartedly approved, seeing it as a perfect reflection of the new, helping, not harassing ethos. Karen had no official say, forced to watch from the sidelines as the community implemented improvements far from her style of enforcement. The day arrived bright and sunny. Residents bustled around, hauling items to a large dumpster parked near the community entrance. Roland, wearing gloves, helped direct traffic. Linda manned a sign-in table, ensuring only residents used the service. George and a few teens drove around with a pickup truck, collecting items from those lacking vehicles. Karen lurked on the periphery, arms folded, glaring at the scene. She believed a day like this would encourage eyesores on the streets. But the atmosphere was jovial. People laughed at the old bric-a-brac discovered in garages, shared stories, and even bartered small items. Trash for one might be treasure for another, they joked. At the event's end, the dumpster was nearly full, removing countless bulky items that might have otherwise lingered in garages or ended up overstuffing bins. Roland marveled at how effectively neighbors cooperated. A far cry from having trash bags hung on a tree, he thought wryly. At the event's conclusion, as Roland stood by the dumpster, he noticed Karen approach. She stared at the piles of discarded items, then at him. Roland waited, uncertain if she might speak. But Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She gave a curt nod, some strange mix of acknowledgement and resentful acceptance, before turning away. Roland exhaled, a slight tension in his chest. He guessed she might never offer a genuine apology, nor admit her wrongdoing. Still, he felt content that her power had waned. Neighbors who witnessed the exchange teased. She was probably trying to decide which item to tie to a tree. The dark humor underscored how deeply Karen's outlandish act had etched itself into local lore. Roland chuckled, relieved that her menacing presence no longer loomed large. In the wake of the trash fiasco, Roland found himself more social. A group of retirees invited him to weekly coffee gatherings. Younger neighbors discovered he had a wealth of old stories from his time traveling with his wife. Linda convinced him to join a local volunteer crew that visited retirement homes. He joked that he might need to retire from retirement. So busy had his schedule become. No longer overshadowed by Karen's petty tyranny, the community seemed to blossom in ways no one had anticipated. Even small yard sales or potlucks took on a friendlier vibe. People felt freer to connect, knowing an oppressive enforcer wouldn't swoop and scold them for minor infractions. Time passed, seasons changed, and Karen's initial fury dulled into a simmering regret. She recognized that her tree-hanging stunt had cost her dearly. Her committee position, her reputation, any sense of moral high ground she once claimed. Late at night, she sometimes stared at the framed HOA guidelines on her wall, thinking how she'd twisted them to justify humiliating a gentle old man. Pride, however, remained a stubborn barrier to any real apology. She occasionally considered writing Roland a sincere letter, but always tore up the drafts. She convinced herself it was too late, that he'd never forgive her. She was probably right, though the gesture might have eased her guilt. Instead, she lived in a self-imposed isolation, an emblem of how petty cruelty leads to lonely consequences. 3 months after the trash tree fiasco, Winfield Acres was thriving under more positive leadership. The board praised the success of the new trash policies, the volunteer networks, and the completed cleanup day. Plans were in motion for a community garden plot, offering a chance to share produce and connect. Roland, though quiet, served as a voice of gentle wisdom on the outreach subcommittee. The nightmares of an overbearing Karen, controlling every aspect of life, had faded. The neighborhood learned how swiftly it could unify against bullying. People overcame their initial reticence to question excessive rules, demanding a kinder approach. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. a kinder, more neighborly place that balanced order and empathy. One afternoon, Roland stood in his front yard, trimming a small rose bush. He noticed Karen pass by on the sidewalk. She slowed, looked as though she might speak, then walked on. He felt no bitterness. The shameful memory of the trash tree incident would always sting, but he realized it had led to a better system, stronger friendships, and an unexpected sense of belonging. He brushed off leaves, thinking how his late wife would be proud to see him so active in the community, forging new connections. Indeed, the fiasco ironically gave him a purpose beyond solitary routines. And though Karen had never apologized, Roland no longer needed that closure. The neighborhood had embraced him with unwavering support, enough to overshadow one woman's cruelty. For Karen, each day was a reminder of her lost influence. She'd glimpsed happiness in neighbors forging alliances, hosting gatherings, or tinkering with yard aesthetics free from her criticisms. She observed from behind curtains, rarely venturing out except for errands. Some nights, she reread the censure letter from the board, a bitter symbol of her downfall. She considered unsubscribing from the HOA's email bulletins altogether, but curiosity kept her reading about new events. She'd see references to Roland's subcommittee or Linda's volunteer projects. A quiet pang gnawed at her. She realized that a sense of purpose, once found in enforcing rules, was absent. Still, her pride and anger ran too deep for her to rejoin community life constructively. In the end, the trash tree fiasco became part of Winfield Acres' collective lore, retold with disbelief, often concluding with how the scandal ironically led to better solutions for waste disposal and a more compassionate neighborhood. Roland's new bin, financed by neighbors, symbolized how quickly a community could unite against cruelty and champion mutual aid. Karen remained in her home, overshadowed by her own actions. The HOA carried on, continuing to refine policies that balanced structure and kindness. Residents no longer feared a midnight sabotage or humiliating displays. They found resilience in each other, forging a harmony that stood in stark contrast to the petty tyranny Karen once embodied. Thus, the final moral of the story: even an act as bizarrely cruel as tying an elderly man's trash bags to a tree could, in the end, spur unity, empathy, and practical improvements. The cruelty had no place in a caring community, and ironically, it led Winfield Acres to become even more neighborly, ensuring no one's trash or dignity was ever again subject to such harsh treatment.